A single man living in the frozen outskirts of Wyoming had stopped believing in second chances. His wife left. His heart froze, and for months not a soul dared to knock on his door. But then one morning, 3 barefoot girls appeared on his porch, bleeding, freezing, and whispering, "Mama died in the snow this morning. We have nowhere to go." Why did they carry his last name? Why did their mother send them to his house of all places? And what does a man do when the past he buried comes back, shivering, crying, and calling him Papa? Watch until the end. Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe if stories like this still matter to you. Daniel Brooks hadn't spoken to another human in 58 days. Not since the sheriff stopped by with divorce papers, and not since Emma slammed the door for the last time, leaving only her perfume trapped in curtains and a ring-shaped stain on the kitchen counter where her coffee used to sit. Winter had arrived early in Sheridan that year, and his land, once golden with prairie grass, now lay buried beneath 2 feet of silence. He'd stopped lighting the fireplace every night. It only reminded him of her, curled on the wicker chair, humming to herself like she belonged there. Now he spoke to the hens, sometimes to the wind, just to hear a voice other than his own. That morning, the cold bit harder than usual. He pulled on the wool coat his father left behind and trudged through the snow toward the barn. His breath hung in the air like unanswered prayers. Chickens squawked at his approach. Something had startled them. He barely had time to process before a voice, soft as thread, broke the stillness. "Mister?" He froze. At the edge of his property, barely visible through the snowfall, stood a girl. 9, maybe 10. Her dress was torn, her legs were scraped, and her arms, shaking as she clutched a smaller child, maybe 4, against her chest. Beside them, a toddler, barefoot, staring. He dropped the feed bucket. The girl's lips moved again, slower this time, cracking as she whispered, "Mama, she died in the snow this morning. We don't have anywhere to go." Daniel's body moved before his brain caught up. He ran through knee-deep snow, slipping once, his breath coming in gasps. The child in her arms coughed, a dry, shallow sound. The toddler reached out to him with fingers blue at the tips, and for the first time in months, Daniel knelt, not for prayer, but to gather a life in pieces. The girl blinked at him through ice-laced lashes. "My name's Riley," she said. "This is Zoe. And that's Lily." He swallowed hard. "Okay," he said, voice breaking. "Come inside. We'll figure the rest out later." Daniel's boots thudded hard against the wooden porch as he kicked the snow from his soles. One arm cradled Lily like she was made of glass. The other held the door open as Riley and Zoe stepped hesitantly inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, a hush fell, like the house itself was holding its breath. The fireless hearth, the dusty couch, the cracked photo frame still sitting on the end table. Emma's scent had long faded, but the silence still wore her name. Zoe whimpered, her hands, too small for fists, curled into her sister's coat. Daniel laid Lily gently onto the old recliner by the window. Her breath was shallow. He touched her forehead, ice. Riley hovered nearby. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday," she said, eyes darting to the cabinets. "And the snow got into her shoes last night." She cried herself quiet. Daniel stood. He moved quickly. Kitchen, drawers, stove. The propane hissed back to life as he struck a match. Within minutes, a pot simmered. He dropped in 2 chicken bouillon cubes, half a bag of dried peas, whatever rice was left. He poured in water and didn't look back. Behind him, the girls sat huddled under the wool throw Emma used to keep in the back of the closet. Zoe curled into Riley's side, her thumb back in her mouth, eyes never blinking. Lily stirred, then coughed. Daniel winced. He pulled blankets from the linen chest, shook the dust out on the porch, and came back with arms full. As he tucked one around Lily, her small hand grasped his finger. He froze. Her fingers were like frost-bitten twine, so delicate they felt like they'd snap. "You're safe now," he whispered, not sure if he meant it for her or himself. Riley glanced toward the fireplace. "Mama said to follow the smoke, that a warm chimney means a kind heart." Daniel didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the soot-stained stone, the cold ashes where he hadn't lit a fire in weeks. Not since Emma left, not since the world turned quiet. He walked over slowly, knelt, and stacked the logs. Pine first, then kindling. His hands moved out of memory. With the same old matchbox he used every Christmas, he struck once, twice, until a flame flickered. It caught, danced, then roared. Warmth, light. The room breathed again. Riley sat up straighter. "Mama said your last name is Brooks." Daniel turned. "That's our last name too." He blinked. His voice lowered. "What did you say?" She nodded. Before she told us to find the man named Daniel Brooks, said he once saved her life." A silence fell thicker than snow. Zoe yawned, eyes heavy, and Lily finally sighed in her sleep. Daniel looked down at the three of them, their faces drawn, their bodies spent, yet somehow still holding on. He pulled the recliner closer to the fire and sat on the edge. His voice came out hoarse. "You're going to stay tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out where to go." Riley leaned her head on his arm. "We're already here?" The fire cracked. Outside, the storm began to whisper itself into sleep. Inside, for the first time in years, Daniel stayed awake. Not to think, not to remember, but to listen to the sound of breath that wasn't his. The scent of boiling broth crept through the house like a promise. Daniel stood by the stove, stirring the pot with one hand, the other gripping the edge of the counter like it might float away. The kitchen felt smaller now, warmer. Behind him, Riley helped Zoe sip from a chipped mug, holding it steady with both hands while Zoe slurped between hiccuped sobs. Lily, bundled in 2 wool blankets, slept curled like a kitten on the old recliner. Her breathing had settled, though her cheeks still carried the blue tint of early frostbite. Daniel kept glancing over his shoulder. Each time her chest rose, he breathed a little easier. The broth wasn't much. Water, salt, peas, rice. But it steamed, and it smelled like survival. He poured it into bowls, set them on the table, then paused. There were only 2 chairs. The others, well, they'd been stored when there was no one left to sit in them. He pulled a crate from the pantry and placed it beside the table. "It's not much," he said, clearing his throat. "But it's hot." Zoe climbed up first, her eyes wide as the steam hit her face. Riley helped Lily to the table, tucking the blanket around her shoulders like she'd done it 100 times before. The girls didn't wait for prayer, or grace, or permission. They dug in with the silent desperation of children who had waited too long to eat. Daniel sat across from them, watching. Zoe looked up, her spoon pausing mid-air. "Are you Santa Claus?" The question hung there for a beat. Daniel blinked, then laughed, low and quiet. "Do I look like Santa?" Zoe nodded. "Your beard's like his, but you don't have a red coat." He scratched his chin, suddenly self-conscious of the grey stubble, the worn flannel, the smell of smoke on his sleeves. Riley whispered, "She asks that a lot. Every year. Mama always said Santa's real, but he's not always dressed the way we expect." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the sugar tin Emma used to keep on the top shelf. Inside were 3 old peppermint sticks, years expired but still wrapped. He laid one in front of each girl. Their eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Zoe gasped. "Then you are Santa." He smiled, half a smile, the kind that only rises when your heart doesn't know if it's aching or healing. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, but inside, soup steamed, candy cracked between baby teeth, and laughter, quiet and cautious, began to fill the cracks in the walls. Daniel leaned back, letting the warmth from the fire reach his spine. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, someone had eaten at that table. And it was enough. The wind outside had shifted. It no longer howled, it warned. Thick clouds crawled across the Wyoming sky, folding over the hills like a closing fist. Snow had started falling again, heavy, relentless. Daniel stood by the window, one hand braced against the frame, the other holding his breath. "She's out there," Riley said, her voice almost too small to hear. He turned. "Mama, she laid us down behind the ridge and said to run, said to find the house with smoke in the chimney. That's how we found you." Daniel didn't speak, just kept staring at the snow. "She said not to come back, said she was tired and she was going to lie down in the snow." Riley's eyes didn't shine with tears. They were past that, dry, dull, used to cold goodbyes. He grabbed his coat. Riley stepped in front of him. "It's too far. It's too dark now." Daniel crouched, holding her arms. "Which way did she go?" She pointed. "Down past the fence, through the gully. There's a break in the trees. Mama said it was the only way through." He kissed the top of her head before he could think twice. "Keep the fire going. Lock the door behind me." Zoe stood at the couch, clutching Lily's blanket. "You'll bring Mama back?" Daniel didn't answer. He stepped outside. The cold slapped his skin like it had something to prove. His breath vanished the second it left his lips. Snow hit sideways. It stung. Still he walked, down past the chicken coop, through the bare orchard, over the frozen fence line, and into the gully where Riley had pointed. Each step sank. The drifts were knee-deep, then waist-deep, his boots filled with snow. He pressed on, guided by instinct and the dull, orange halo of his lantern, which flickered against the wind like a flame ready to die. He found her. Sarah lay curled beneath a pine, one arm stretched as if reaching for something she'd dropped in a dream. Her skin was blue-gray, her lips parted, but her chest, barely, still moved. Daniel knelt, wrapped his coat around her and whispered, "I got you." Her eyes fluttered open for a moment. "The girls," she rasped. "They're safe." A single tear welled in her cracked eye. "I couldn't make it." "You did." He tightened the coat, lifted her against him, and rose. She was light, too light, like she'd left most of herself in the snow. It took everything in him to climb back out of that gully step by step, wind against his face, legs burning. But somewhere in the dark, a chimney smoked, and that meant someone was waiting. Sarah stirred before dawn. The fire had burned low, casting shadows that danced across the wooden beams of Daniel's living room. She lay wrapped in blankets on the couch, her skin no longer blue, but pale like ash after flame. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and searching, unsure if she was still alive. Daniel sat nearby, elbows on knees, head down. He hadn't slept. His coat lay across the floor, soaked through from snow and sweat. His boots, still wet, sat by the door. When he heard her cough, a thin, papery sound, he looked up. "You're awake," he said, quietly. Not like a man surprised, like a man relieved. Sarah blinked, trying to sit up. Her body gave out. Daniel rose, poured a ladle of broth into a mug, and brought it to her lips. "Just a little," he said. "Sip slow." She drank, trembling. Then, through chapped lips, she whispered, "I thought I heard them. The girls." Daniel nodded. "They're here, sleeping upstairs. Riley wouldn't rest until she knew you were warm." Sarah's breath caught. She closed her eyes and tears broke free, trailing down her temples into her hairline. "I left them in the dark." "You saved them in the dark," he replied. She turned her head slowly, took in the room. The lit fire, the folded towels, the pot of broth. And Daniel, tired, unshaven, his flannel shirt wrinkled and stained. She frowned slightly. "I know you," she whispered. "Don't I?" He didn't move, didn't blink. "Sheridan County. You used to work on my father's fence line," she murmured. "You wore that same jacket." "I remember," Daniel said. "You were the only one who offered water when it was 95 degrees. Her eyes drifted to the staircase. "They know?" Daniel shook his head. "Only your oldest. She said your last name was Brooks." Sarah's face twisted. Well, not in pain, but something else. Guilt, maybe. Or something heavier. She looked away. Daniel knelt beside her, brushing the damp hair from her forehead. "You don't have to explain anything now. You're safe. That's enough." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, Sarah said, "I wasn't sure where else to go. I thought, maybe... You'd remember, that's all I had left to bet on." Daniel stood, pulled the blanket higher over her chest and whispered, "Well, you bet right." From upstairs, the sound of little feet on creaking floorboards. Then Riley's voice, hushed but urgent. "Mama!" Sarah turned, eyes wide. "I'm here, baby!" she called out, barely loud enough. "I'm here!" Footsteps rushed down. Daniel stepped back. 3 girls tumbled into the room like dawn itself. And the woman who was sure she'd die in the snow was swallowed whole by the warmth of her children's arms. The morning light bled in through the frosted windows, painting the walls a soft gold that hadn't touched this house in years. The scent of cinnamon toast filled the air, not because Daniel had planned it, but because Zoe, the youngest, had insisted. She stood on a chair, oversized oven mitts on her tiny hands, watching the toaster like it might vanish. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with a strange ache in his chest. It was a kind of quiet joy, not loud, not dramatic, just still. Something he hadn't felt since Emma left. At the table, Riley helped Lily with a puzzle someone had dug out of an old cabinet. The pieces were worn, corners frayed, but it didn't matter. The girls giggled as they forced wrong pieces to fit, then laughed even harder when they popped back out. On the couch, Sarah sat wrapped in Daniel's old flannel blanket, her legs tucked beneath her. Her colour had returned. She looked stronger, but her eyes, they held a storm he knew too well. Not fear, not shame, just the knowledge of weight, too heavy to explain. "I should go," she said, voice low. Daniel didn't move. "Go where?" She hesitated. "Anywhere that isn't your burden," he scoffed. "You think this is a burden?" She looked down at her hands. "I think you didn't ask for this." Daniel stepped forward, pulled out a chair across from her. "Saturday? I didn't ask for any of it," he said. "Not the leaving, not the quiet, not the frost that crept in and made a home in these walls." He paused, watching Zoe carefully spread peanut butter with the back of a spoon. "But they came here. You brought them here. And whether you meant to or not, you brought the heat back with you." Sarah didn't speak. Her lips parted, then closed. Her fingers trembled slightly, clutching the edge of the blanket. "You didn't ask to raise them alone," he added. "But you did." She blinked fast, fighting back tears that weren't ready to fall. Their father, I didn't know where he went. I didn't even know if he was still alive. Daniel didn't flinch. I'm right here. Silence. Riley glanced up from the puzzle, watching them both with the sharpness of a child who had grown up too fast. Lily kept fitting pieces, unaware that the world might be shifting. Zoe handed Sarah a slice of toast, beaming. I didn't burn it this time. Sarah took it with shaking hands. It's perfect, she whispered. Daniel stood and poured 2 cups of coffee. He slid one to her. I'm not asking you to stay forever, he said, but maybe, just long enough to finish breakfast. She took a sip, and for the first time she smiled, not politely, not out of survival, but for real. And in that small, quiet room, filled with puzzles and toast and the faint hum of life, something unspoken settled. They weren't strangers anymore. By mid-afternoon, the sky had cleared, leaving behind a vast canvas of pale blue stretched over white hills. Sunlight glittered off the snow like broken glass. Inside the house, the girls napped upstairs, worn out from warmth and full stomachs. The quiet was different now, not empty, but resting. Daniel stood at the edge of the barn, leaning against the doorway, a cigarette burning between his fingers. He hadn't smoked in 3 years. He didn't even know why he lit it. Maybe habit. Maybe memory. Or maybe because every word Sarah had spoken just minutes ago still echoed in his chest. She had followed him out to the barn earlier, asked for a moment alone, then told him everything. The shelters, the night shifts, the months of sleeping in the back of a pickup, parked behind truck stops, the day she pawned her wedding ring just to buy shoes for Riley. She never once asked for pity, she just laid it down like a woman done carrying more than she could hold. Now she sat on the back steps, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the line of trees at the far edge of the field. I was going to give them away, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. The girls. I was going to split them between churches or whatever places would take them. I thought maybe that way they'd have a chance. Daniel didn't answer. He just flicked the ash into the snow, watched it melt through the ice. But I couldn't, she added. Not because I'm strong, because I'm weak. I needed to believe someone would find us. He stepped forward, sat beside her on the wooden step. The wind tugged at the fringe of her scarf. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said, I spent 2 winters here waiting for someone to knock. Not because I wanted company, but because I didn't think I could move without a reason. Sarah turned to him. And now? Daniel looked toward the house, the smoke curling from the chimney, the window where Lily had pressed her hand earlier, waving, the dent in the snow where Riley had dropped her boot and laughed like it didn't hurt anymore. Now I think I'll need to build another bedroom, he said. Sarah laughed, a raw, quiet thing, but it was real, and that was more than enough for now. The next morning arrived dressed in gold. Sunlight spilled across the floorboards, warming the air before the stove could. The scent of frying eggs drifted through the house. Daniel in the kitchen, pan in hand, Zoe on a stool beside him, humming some half-remembered song. Riley sat cross-legged on the rug, brushing Lily's hair. She worked slowly, careful not to tug too hard. Sarah watched from the hallway, coffee in hand, silent. The scene looked borrowed from someone else's life, too gentle, too whole. But then, 3 sharp knocks at the door. Daniel stiffened. He turned the stove off, handed the spatula to Zoe, and wiped his hands on a towel. The knock came again, louder this time. Behind him, Sarah stepped closer, tension crawling back into her shoulders. He opened the door, A deputy stood on the porch, boots caked with road salt, eyes scanning past Daniel into the house. "Morning," the deputy said. "You Daniel Brooks?" Daniel nodded. "Got a call. 3 missing miners. Found sleeping bags behind a gas station off Route 14. Said they might have come this way." Daniel didn't flinch. "They're here, safe, with their mother." The deputy shifted, pulling a small notepad. "We'll need to confirm custody. The system flagged some records, foster applications, housing violations, nothing criminal, but enough to trigger a welfare check." Sarah stepped forward. "They're mine. I never gave them up." The deputy raised a brow. "Then why were they out in the cold?" Sarah opened her mouth, but the words caught. Daniel stepped between them. "Because the world doesn't always wait for paperwork." The deputy sighed, writing something down. "A social worker will be here by noon. Until then, nobody leaves." Daniel nodded once, slow. "We'll be here." The deputy tipped his hat, glanced once more at the girls inside, then turned back toward the patrol car, tires crunching over packed snow. Inside, silence. Sarah leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "It's starting," she whispered. Daniel looked at her, jaw tight. "Then we start too." Riley walked over, slipping her hand into Sarah's. "You said families fight together, right?" Sarah looked down, blinking back heat in her eyes, then nodded. "Right." The social worker arrived just before noon, her heels crunching against the gravel driveway, briefcase tight to her side like a shield. Her name was Meredith Clark, mid-40s, tidy, unblinking. The kind of woman who had seen too much and learned to wear armor made of policy. Daniel met her at the door, holding it open without a word. She stepped inside and scanned the room like a scanner at airport security, taking in the fireplace, the dishes drying by the sink, the coloring books on the floor. Sarah stood beside the stairs, her back straight, hands clasped. Riley hovered behind her, Zoe peeked from the hallway, and Lily clutched a ragged stuffed dog like it might fly away. "Ms. Holbrook?" Meredith began, her tone firm but not unkind. "You've been flagged for multiple relocations, no proof of income, and failure to comply with court-ordered check-ins." Sarah nodded once. "I know." "Are you currently employed?" "No." "Permanent residence?" Sarah's voice cracked. "This is the closest I've come." Meredith wrote that down, clicked her pen. Daniel stepped forward. She didn't abandon them. She carried them through a blizzard. They nearly died because she tried to keep them alive. Meredith glanced at him, measured. "And you are?" "I'm Daniel Brooks. This is my home." Meredith raised an eyebrow. "You have no legal guardianship over these children?" "No," he said quietly. "Just a working heater, hot meals, and room upstairs for 3 beds. She looked back at Sarah. "Ms. Holbrook, you understand that harboring your children outside of legal custodial guidelines could be viewed as an attempt to evade placement." Sarah swallowed. "I didn't plan it like this. I just ran out of plans." Meredith exhaled through her nose, scribbled something into her folder, then crouched, suddenly, eye level with Zoe, who flinched at the movement. "What's your name, sweetie?" "Zoe," came the whisper. "Do you feel safe here?" Zoe nodded, thumb inching toward her mouth. "Do you like living with your mommy?" Zoe looked at Sarah, then back to Meredith. "She keeps us warm now, and he makes toast with cinnamon." Meredith blinked. Something shifted in her jaw, just slightly. She stood, folded the folder closed. "I'll be filing for a temporary custody review, but I won't be requesting immediate removal." Sarah choked on air. "Wait, what?" Meredith gave the faintest of smiles. "You'll need to meet with the county judge in 2 weeks. Until then, don't disappear. Stay here. Show up clean, honest, and on time. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a better word than temporary." She turned and walked out. The door shut. The wind returned. But inside, something else had arrived. The space between survival and something that almost looked like hope. That night, the house didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of breath. Daniel sat by the fireplace, Lily curled against his side, snoring softly. Riley and Zoe had dragged their blankets down to the living room floor, insisting they'd camp in case the social worker came back to check. Sarah stood in the doorway, a mug of tea cooling in her hands, watching her girls wrapped in quilt and firelight. "They used to sleep on concrete," she said quietly. Daniel didn't respond right away. He just reached over, grabbed a second log and fed the fire. It hissed, then flared. "I thought I'd lost the right to raise them," she continued. "Turns out, maybe I just needed to learn how to ask for help." Daniel looked up. "You didn't ask. You survived. That's louder." She smiled, barely. Outside, the snow had stopped. The moon hung heavy and low, touching the trees like a blessing. Inside, warmth lingered. Not just heat, but belonging. Sarah stepped forward, knelt beside her daughters, brushed a strand of hair from Zoe's cheek. "We'll be okay," she whispered. From the couch, Daniel asked, "You staying?" She looked up at him, and for once, didn't hesitate. "I already did." The fire cracked, the clock ticked, and for the first time in years, no one planned to leave in the morning. If this story moved you, share it. Somewhere, someone's walking through snow and just needs a reason to knock. Leave a comment, hit like or subscribe. Your voice might be the warmth they're waiting for.